This is Sean Harris, and today we're going to go through cryptography. We'll look at the foundations so that we can understand the components that the different protocols and software that use cryptography is built upon. Now, the foundations include understanding what keys are, algorithms are, how they're used together. And a lot of people think that cryptography only provides confidentiality through encryption and decryption. But cryptography has several different algorithm sets, and each set provides a different security service. We also have integrity, authentication, and non-repudiation that we'll go through today, what those concepts are and how algorithms provide them. We'll look at some crypto systems and what a crypto system is. It's important to understand how protocols and software use the different foundations, the different underlying components of cryptography to provide the services that they do. We will look at encryption and decryption processes in this video mentor, and in the other ones following this we'll get more into hashing, integrity, authentication, and public key cryptography. So as I said, encryption does provide confidentiality, which we'll look at how they work together, encryption, decryption, keys, and algorithms, and how integrity is provided through hashing. So cryptography also provides authentication and potentially authorization. Authentication is provided if somebody uses their private key. The private key is only supposed to know and be held by the individual. So if I encrypt something with my private key, that means that there is authentication because I'm the only one who's supposed to have access to this private key. So using the private key and public key cryptography also provides non-repudiation. And this is a concept we'll get through and go deeper into some of the different video mentors that we're going to do in this product. Non-repudiation means that a sender cannot deny sending a message. So if I encrypt something with my private key, again, I'm the only one who's supposed to have my private key. If I encrypt something with my private key, that provides non-repudiation. I cannot deny sending you that message. As we see here, there are different industries that require different types of security services from cryptography. Now, in reality, every organization is going to need some type of integrity, confidentiality, authentication, and potentially non-repudiation. But when you look at these organizations in these industries, you could see that some require more than another one. For example, financial services. Financial services has used cryptography usually earlier than the other organizations because it's always had to encrypt and protect sensitive financial information. Also, the government has been using cryptography earlier because it's had to use protection against ensuring that enemies don't get our or any national secrets. And we know that with healthcare, that healthcare private information has to be protected also. Another concept we need to understand is cryptoanalysis. Cryptoanalysis is basically penetration testing of algorithms and crypto systems. If I carry out cryptoanalysis on an algorithm, what I'm usually trying to figure out is the actual key that was used during the encryption process. So to carry out a cryptoanalysis attack, what I'm going to do is I'll have the algorithm. So let's say you encrypt a message. I get a hold of that encrypted message, but I can't read it because it's encrypted. So I want to be able to decrypt probably not only this message, but any message you encrypt with that specific key. So what I'm going to do is I will know the actual algorithm you're using. I will create key 1. So key 1 I'll use with the algorithm and attempt to decrypt your message. Now if I can decrypt it, that means I figured out the key. And most of the time, several thousands of keys are going to have to be created before the attacker figures out the right one. So I will try key 2, use it with the algorithm, attempt to decrypt your message, and again, if it's readable, then I figured out the key. If it's still garbage, meaning that it's encrypted information, then I haven't figured out the key. Now, cryptanalysis is carried out by white hats and black hats. So the white hats are the good guys, and they will carry out cryptanalysis on crypto systems and algorithms to try to find the vulnerabilities and the weaknesses before the bad guy does. So cryptanalysis is carried out by the bad guys, by the black hats, to find the same vulnerabilities and weaknesses, to be able to exploit them, to be able to then uncover the encryption key. Now, to protect the algorithms and crypto systems, we need to have a high work factor. And what work factor means is that it's basically impossible for you to have all the time and the resources and the skill set to be able to break a crypto system or an algorithm. So there are 3 main parts of breaking anything in security, any type of countermeasures. If you're going to break something in security, then you need to have the skill set, you need to have the resources, and you need to have the necessary time. In cryptography, not a lot of people have the skill set specifically to break algorithms because our algorithms are so strong today. But people do. You need to have the right skill set. You need to have the necessary amount of resources. And these resources in cryptography with cryptoanalysis is usually the processing power. You need to have a lot of processing power to generate the thousands of keys that you're going to need to uncover encrypted information. Now, the third part is time. Anything in security can be broken, but with algorithms, usually the work factor will actually maybe take thousands of years to break, which you're not going to have, obviously. So the work factor of cryptography means that the skill set, the resources, and the time needs to be so high, needs to be so much, that it's basically impossible for somebody to break it. So we need to look at the different components of cryptography. And the main components are the key and algorithm. Now, the algorithm, I find that people know what maybe different algorithms are, and they understand a little bit about where keys come into play, but they don't necessarily understand the full relationship between the two. So an algorithm is full of mathematical functions and logic functions. As we see on this graphic here, there's several different ones. Now, if we're going to use an algorithm and we're going to use the same sequence of the functions or the logic functions, there's not enough randomness. So, for example, let's say within an algorithm we use function 1, then we use function 2, then we use function 3. There's no randomness. A bad guy can figure that out pretty quickly, that sequence of 1, 2, 3. So we need to have a level of randomness. So let's say we use function 1, use function 7, use function 14. And what this means is if I have a plain text message, a message that you could read, it needs to go through this algorithm, and the algorithm needs to use unique sequences during the encryption process to come up with a ciphertext. So how does it come up with this unique sequence? This is where the key comes in. The key is a set of random bits, which is a set of random numbers, and the key is actual instructions for the algorithm. So the key would tell the algorithm use function 12, then use function 2, then use function 16. And with this random sequence, it's much more difficult for the bad guy to figure out what sequence is actually used. So we need to be able to understand the importance of key size, key management, which we're going to talk about, but also about algorithms. Now, algorithms are going to be static. Their function and their logic is always going to be the same thing. It's the algorithm itself is not going to change. It's the keys that actually induce the randomness with the algorithm's functions. So here we see a pretty basic conceptual example of how an algorithm and key would be used. At the top we see we have a plain text message. This message is broken up into four bits. Now each of these blocks of 4 bits are going to go through what's called substitution boxes. Those are S box that we see here. Within the S box there's going to be a set of mathematical functions and logic functions like we talked about. And instead of the block of the 4 bits going through the same S boxes every single time and through a sequence of 1, 2, 3, the key is going to be used to indicate what these 4 blocks are going to go through. So a block of 4 bits can go through S box 1, then S box 13, and then S box 21. That's determined by the key. On this graphic we only have 2 sets of S boxes, which is very simplistic, and it's only used to show you conceptually how this works. Algorithms today have many more sets of functions that bits are going to go through, so it's not this simplistic. So here we see the algorithm, which like we said is different functions. We see that we have a plain text message, which is a message that we could read. The key is going to indicate the function sequence, and what's going to result is the ciphertext. Now, I keep mentioning a cryptosystem. A cryptosystem is not just an algorithm. It's all of the components that are necessary to carry out processes to provide the security services we need. So those security services could be integrity, it could be authentication, it could be non-repudiation, it could be confidentiality. So a cryptosystem includes the algorithm, the key, the initialization vectors, which we'll talk about, the software, and the protocols. Each one of these has to be developed properly, and they have to interact properly to be a secure cryptosystem. And we see PGP as an example of a cryptosystem. VPNs, as in SSL or IPsec, would be considered cryptosystems also because they have all of these components. Now here is an encrypted message, just an example with PGP, which again we consider a cryptosystem. PGP is an example of a cryptosystem. So it's not only important for the exam to understand what a cryptosystem is. I've been in several organizations as a consultant, and I've seen companies try to come up with their own cryptosystems, meaning they may develop their own algorithms, which is very, very different and very difficult. It's not a good idea to try to develop your own algorithm. That's because we have algorithms today that are very strong, that has been reviewed. When you come up with your own algorithm, usually it's too complex to do it correctly. The organizations also could use an algorithm that has been developed already and has been reviewed and has been approved by the industry. But they might come up with their own initialization vectors, they might come up with their own key sizes and implement these into software. Again, not a good idea because overall the cryptosystem that is usually developed is not as strong as they think it is. We should use the protocols, the software, the algorithms that are already developed because they've been going through different cryptographers, they've been approved by standard boards. So the most successful attack with cryptography, just like any other software security measure, countermeasure in the industry, The weakest point is always people. And the same thing is with cryptography. Usually our algorithms, our crypto systems are strong enough and they've proven themselves. But there's key management, which means you need to protect your private keys. You need to protect symmetric keys. You need to have backup copies in case the keys are corrupted or lost. And those backup copies have to be protected also. So I'm quickly going through the foundations that we need to understand, and we're going to dig a little bit more into them. But it's overwhelming. Cryptography is usually the hardest domain within the CISSP exam for people. And it's because it's an analytical understanding, and it's really the only domain that you have to understand the very basics, the key, the algorithms, the types of keys, the type of algorithms. You have to build on top of that knowledge to be able to then understand how database encryption, VPNs, and other type of crypto systems work. So thank goodness what we don't really need to understand is the mathematics that go into it, unless you're going to create your own algorithm, and then of course you're going to develop your own logic functions and mathematical functions. Now, many people know that larger key sizes provide more security, more protection. But why is this? Why does a 128-bit key provide more security than a 64-bit? Well, this is because a 128-bit key will provide a larger key space than a 64-bit. Now, a key space is created by an algorithm. When a 128-bit key goes into an algorithm, the algorithm creates a key space. So the key space is the number of keys that can be created. So remember, we're talking about binary here. So 64 to the second power versus 128 to the second power. The 128 is going to provide more bits, more possible keys that can be used during encryption. So this is a concept, and if it really kind of comes into when you're looking at the strength of an algorithm needs to create a full key space. And what that means is if an algorithm is not created properly, let's say that we feed in a 128-bit key. Now, if the algorithm is not strong enough and it has flaws in it, it may create a key space of 64 bits. So the algorithm itself has to create a key space that correlates with the key size. So what's kind of neat is that once you understand the foundations of cryptography, you build on that and to understand the protocols and how disk encryption works, how SSL will work, how database encryption works. And a lot of people get overwhelmed when cryptography is new to them. But once you have these foundations down, you really can understand how these different crypto systems that we have shown here work. So this is just an example of what needs to be in place when you're creating keys and you're doing key management. The lifetime of the key needs to correlate with the sensitivity of the data. Now, this is similar to passwords. Your passwords need to be changed out. And the reason that passwords need to be changed out is because the longer you use a password, the larger the window is for the bad guy to figure out your password. And the same thing is with keys. If you use a key over and over and over and over again, that bad guy has a lot more chances to be able to figure out your key. So the key itself has what's called a crypto period. That's how long you should use a key. And just like with passwords, you should the key needs to correlate with the sensitivity data. So let's say we have very sensitive information that needs to be protected by a password. Well, we should change that password out more often, maybe every 15 days, every 30 days. If we have text that is not as confidential, it's not as sensitive, then we don't have to change our passwords out that often. And that's the same with keys. The more sensitive the data, the more often you should change those keys out. So we talked about key management, the number of keys that are created. So the larger amount of keys that are created and kept somewhere increases the window or the possibility of somebody being able to get one of those keys and decrypt information that they're not supposed to have access to. So here we show 31 keys. That's a lot of keys to create. And the problem is the more keys there are, the harder it is to ensure that each one is properly protected. And these keys can be distributed. It might be on a server, it might be on a router, it might be on a person's workstation or laptop. So all those instances of the keys have to be properly protected. So when we're looking at the strength of cryptography itself, we talked about the proper development of not only the algorithm but the software that's using the algorithm. And here we're looking at initialization vector. Now, initialization vector has to be random, just like the key has to be random. Remember, the key is instructions for the algorithm itself, and it's the one that introduces randomness to the encryption process. The initialization vector also has to be random. And what the initialization vector is basically like a seed value, meaning it's a starting point. So if the initialization vector is the same for all your messages, it has the same seed value, which means that it's easier for somebody to figure out the initialization vector and be able to decrypt and access your information. So here we see the initialization vector going in with a key to an algorithm. At the top we have DB1. Maybe this is database cell 1. So we have DB1, which is the plain text. That's a block of plain text. That block of plain text goes through the algorithm, which uses the key and the initialization vector, and what comes out of that is the ciphertext. And at the bottom we see that the key plus ciphertext plus plain text equals another set of ciphertext. So here's another example or graphic of the initialization vector going in to start as a seed value for the plain text. The plain text is going to go through the algorithm using the key to create the ciphertext. So we're going to go a little bit deeper. What we see here, RC4, is a symmetric algorithm. A symmetric algorithm will use a key and an initialization vector, and what a stream cipher will, and stream cipher is a type of symmetric algorithm, and we're going to go into that more in the other presentations within this video mentor product. So the key and the initialization vector go into a stream algorithm, and what comes out of that, what's generated, is called a key stream. And we see that the key stream is a random set of bits, ones and zeros. And how this works is the first bit of the key stream, we see it's 1, will be XOR'd to the first bit of the plaintext message. So the first bit from the key stream XOR'd to the first bit of the plaintext message ends up to be the ciphertext. XOR is a mathematical binary function. So the key stream, the second bit, is XOR'd to the second bit of the plaintext message, which equals the next ciphertext bit. Now we need to know not only how cryptography and crypto systems are strong, but we need to understand how keys can be strong and initialization can be strong, which means that they provide the level of randomness to the key, to the algorithm itself. So the initialization vector can't be repeating values. So if we had all ones, or let's say we have 5 ones together, that would be repeating patterns. If we had 5 ones, then 3 zeros, 5 ones and 3 zeros, that would be a repeating pattern. And the problem with that is that there's not enough randomness. Again, it provides a larger window for somebody to figure out what this value is and break our crypto system. They also need to be unpredictable. So what this means is, just because I have a ciphertext message, so let's say you encrypt a message and I get a hold of that message, I cannot figure out the key from that message. So I cannot reverse engineer from your encrypted message and figure out the key. That's what it means here, that the key stream is not specifically related to the key itself. And just like there can't be repeating patterns, the key stream needs to have just as many zeros as ones. Now, this may seem like we're getting a little too deep into cryptography, but this is what the CISSP exam expects of what you need to know, but also it's the basics of cryptography itself. You as a security person cannot go and analyze and understand if something's providing the level of strength, the level of protection it is supposed to, if you don't understand how it works. Now, this is a little bit more complex than what you'll need to know for the CISSP exam, but what this graphic shows is how sending a message, which is encrypting here, and then receiving the message, how it's just the reverse of the process. So we see that we have initialization vector. This shows the actual key storage, where the keys have to be properly protected. Keys are generated. They're the right strength. They're using the right length. The algorithm is using all of the key space. There's a plain text message that's going to get encrypted. We have the input. Now this is reverse. See, the first is the encryption and the second is the decryption, where we had the input going in as plain text. We have this as ciphertext. It's got to go through the same process, the same algorithm, using the same initialization vector and the same key to be able to reverse and be able to get a hold of the plain text message. Now, we went pretty quickly through what the foundations are. We're going to build upon that in different components of the Video Mentor product. Now, let's do a quick review. The cryptography foundations. What are the foundations to cryptography? That's the key, the algorithm, the initialization vector. And why do they have to be what they are? Why do they have to be random? How do they work together? Well, the algorithm is a set of mathematical and logic functions. We can't use them in the same sequence, so we need randomness. Randomness is provided by the key and the initialization vector. These are the basic foundations that you need to understand and then build upon them. Remember that cryptography does not just provide confidentiality. We have confidentiality, integrity, authentication, non-repudiation, and it requires, each one of those services actually require different algorithm types. We looked at what a crypto system is, and a crypto system are all the components, the software that's used, potentially protocols that are used, the keys, the algorithms, the initialization vector. Now, why is this important that a crypto system is secure in all of the components? Well, and if one is insecure or one is weak, it really kind of brings the whole card down for the crypto system overall. And what are some examples of crypto systems? Remember PGP, IPsec, SSL. They have all of the components that have to work together properly to provide the services that they're supposed to. And we looked through the encryption and decryption process. We saw that plain text is encrypted using a key initialization vector in the algorithm, and then the process is reversed, which means the receiver has to have the same key, the same initialization vector, and the same algorithm to properly carry out the reverse of the functions to be able to decrypt the message that is encrypted. So next we're going to get deeper into symmetric and asymmetric algorithms, how they're used together. Thank you so much for your time on this presentation.